You.
Okie doke. Great. Thank you so much, Devin and Melissa and Ratio Christi Group for having me. I think that the Ratio Christi chapter there is a great resource for you guys. And I think it's wonderful that you have that there and have 100 videos with different talks and stuff and different topics and different speakers. I think that's really great. That is not at every school. And a number of years ago, it didn't exist at all. So, that wasn't there at all. So it's really a great thing to have. I really appreciate being back. And if you saw my, or were there when I spoke any of the previous 3 times, if you missed it, that's all on the video. It's all up there. Devin has put it all up there. So you can go back and listen if you want. But if you happen to have heard any of that, I'll just briefly say my background was in what is called the New Age for a number of years. I was a professional astrologer, and I was also involved in Eastern religions. So I started off interested in Hinduism. Very strong interest there, started in college, actually. And that continued afterwards. I did a lot of reading. I started believing in reincarnation. I would say within, I don't know, I can't remember exactly when I started believing in it, but that was probably one of the earliest beliefs that I had as far as an Eastern spiritual belief would go. And I was reading about meditation and some of the groups in this country, the Hindu groups that are here and help popularize interest in Hinduism. So all of that I was reading up on. At some point, a bit later, for whatever reason, I got interested in going to a Tibetan Buddhist group. There was a paper. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, after college, and there was a paper there. I don't know if it still exists. It's a free weekly paper called Creative Loafing, and it was just full of ads of all kinds of groups and places you could go. Everything you can imagine was in there. I mean, everything from Christian groups, churches, to cults, to Eastern groups, to New Age groups, occult groups. I mean, everything was in there. So I used to always look through that. And I had seen this little blurb for this Tibetan Buddhist, come see us and meditate with us. And, I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was very appealing to me. So I went there. They were in a very large, old, almost kind of like a Victorian house in a slightly older residential area of Atlanta. And they owned that house, and actually members of the group lived in that house. So they all lived there together. And every Wednesday they would have a lecture. I'm sorry, first they would meditate, and then they would have a lecture. And then afterwards they had all this food and snacks, kind of like you guys, what you guys do. And you could, get to know people and talk and socialize and all that. So my very first time I went there, the man who was kind of the leader, recognized me as having never been there before. And he asked me if I wanted to know how to do the meditation. And I said, yes. He took me into a room by myself. I mean, just him and me were in there. And we sat down on the floor, and he led me through how to do the meditation, which basically was counting your out breaths. So, and you breathe in and then you breathe out. That's 1. Then you breathe in, breathe out 2. Okay, so that is one form of Eastern meditation. There's lots of different forms of it. So then we went into the other room, and everybody was sitting on the floor on little cushions, and they started the meditation, and everybody was completely quiet for about 45 minutes. And then somebody gave a lecture based on the Tibetan Buddhist views of their leader. This particular group was led by a man named Chogyam Trungpa, and he was actually known as the bad boy of Buddhism because he had a very wild lifestyle, to say the least. And he used to just say all these crazy things that I was kind of confused about. And I'm telling you this because it's going to relate to Buddhism in general. But one of the things I heard about him was that he would get into bed with naked women. He would get drunk. Okay, now this does not sound like what I thought of as a spiritual lifestyle. Sound like a hedonistic lifestyle to me. So I was talking to some of the people afterwards, when they were having the snacks. Now, I don't think this was the first time I was there. This was later. And they were talking about Chogyam Trungpa and what he did. And I said, but why is he doing these things? Why does he go to bed with naked women and get drunk and everything? And they said, oh, well, he's a master. And he has gone beyond all the boundaries that we have to have. And he is just being a mirror for us. So he's a mirror to reflect back to you what you think you want to see, or what you think is true, or what you think is real. So I that's basically what they told me. And I thought, well, okay. Now, I had read a little bit about this idea of a guru. Guru is really a Hindu word, but a guru or a teacher being like a mirror that reflects back to you. And that was supposed to get you to examine yourself and examine your ideas and examine your boundaries that you were conditioned to have, because the whole idea in Eastern religions and all of them, Hinduism, Taoism, and Buddhism, is to break down your understanding of reality. It's to break it down. That's the purpose of it, because they don't think that you are seeing the nature of true reality. And all Eastern religions, their goal is not to discover, who God is. There isn't even a God in Buddhism or Taoism. It's not to discover who God is. It's not to discover even truth. It's not to discover what's good and what's bad. It's to discover the true nature of reality. That is the purpose. That is the search, the spiritual search in Eastern religions. So I was taking in these ideas because I bought some books by Chogyam Trungpa. There was a very, very famous one called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And I read that book. It had a big effect on me. I was doing the meditations. I was going there every week, and I was also doing the meditation at home. So I began to really kind of get into this orientation towards this idea that, there was another reality beyond what I was seeing, that what I was seeing wasn't the full reality. Now, I had already been introduced to that idea through some of the books I had read on Hinduism and some other things I had read, but I was, in this case, kind of experiencing it more than just reading about it. So it's kind of like I was being around people who were doing it and hearing the teachings from the followers of this guy. And so it had more of an impact on me. And I was just kind of very gradually sort of drinking it in as what was happening. Now, after many, many months, I'm not sure how long I went there. It was for a while. I'm not sure if it was a year, but it was maybe close to that. The leader came up to me one night and said, I'd like you to come to our private meetings on Monday night. And I said, what do you do there? And he said, well, we do meditations, but he said, we learn the mudras. And the mudras are hand movements and hand gestures that actually come from Hinduism. And this was, it's actually the thinking behind this is that when you're moving your hands a certain way, you're moving certain kinds of energy in your body. and you're doing these spiritual things. It's not just a matter of moving your hands. But I didn't want to be sucked into the group because I didn't want to be confined. And I had this feeling that if I started going to that Monday night meeting, they would kind of get me into the group and I would be seen as a part of the group, or they would ask me to join or whatever, they did. And I didn't want to do that because I felt like I was just kind of at the edge of my spiritual explorations. And I wanted to be able to go in any direction that I wanted. So I thanked him and told him I would think about it. And then that was it. I didn't go back anymore because I didn't want him to pressure me to try to go to these Monday night meetings, to the private meetings. So I didn't go. Now, so from there, I started reading other things, other Buddhist teachings from Zen Buddhism. Now, at this point, I want to explain the difference. I want to explain what Buddhism is. Of course, Buddhism comes from the teachings of Buddha, who actually lived in India and was raised Hindu. But he felt, now this is the story of Buddha, and I want you to know that there's no real historical verification for this. They don't even know who the Buddha was. There's this idea it was Siddhartha, I'm not saying it, Siddhartha Gautama, I can't even say it. But that's not really that historically verified. So there's not even any strong history here, but the history that's given is that he felt that Hinduism was too restrictive and too much of a burden because there was so much that you had to do and so much that you had to follow. And he tried different things. He tried being an ascetic and denying himself food and denying himself comfort, and sleeping on a bed of nails or whatever. He tried all the different methods that he thought you could take, and he didn't feel any of them were helpful. And so that's when he went and sat under the Bodhi tree, supposedly, and he sat under this tree. I think it's for 40 days. I can't remember if it was 40 days. And there are all kinds of tales about this, like on certain days, these what they call in Buddhism demons came to confuse him or take him away from his meditation. He was meditating. Now, in Buddhism, when they say demons, it doesn't mean demons the way we as Christians understand it. It's not the same thing. So don't think that it's like demons, like fallen angels. Demons are an entirely different thing in Buddhism. The worldview is so different that it's hard to equate anything in their worldview with anything in our worldview. That's how different it is. I'm going to try, but we're not getting into the whole demon thing. Then on the last day is when all of a sudden he had this, realization, and there's more stories about this, and I think some goddess figure visited him, and there's more stories about this, but he was enlightened, and he realized that that's when the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism came out. All life is suffering. So that was his first understanding. Everything in this world is suffering. And that suffering is what brings you back. That brings you back in rebirth, because Buddhism took on a lot of some of the Hindu ideas, but then they got somewhat modified or altered in Buddhism. So sometimes there's correlations between Buddhism and Hinduism, but at the same time, they're two very distinct religions, and they're not the same thing, but you do find some overlap. So it can be kind of confusing. So there's reincarnation in Hinduism and rebirth in Buddhism. And Buddha taught that there was a way out of this suffering. So that was another noble truth. So there is a way out of this suffering. And what he taught was the way out of this was to cultivate detachment. Because what's bringing you back for rebirth is your attachment to this reality and your attachment to your identity as an individual. And that's bringing you back. So those kind of became the core truths of Buddhism, and everything else is built on that. Now, Buddhism and Hinduism, they both have very complicated histories. And because Buddhism came out of Hinduism and there's overlaps, it gets even more confusing. So Tibetan Buddhism, that's when Buddhism went from India into Tibet. And when it went into Tibet, it merged with the indigenous religion there called Bon, B-O-N. And the indigenous religion, of course, it was very, very shamanistic, animistic, belief in spirits. Spirits are in things. There's bad spirits, good spirits. You have to do things to appease the spirits. And there's a lot of occult practices like divination involved. So Tibetan Buddhism kind of merged with that. So Tibetan Buddhism also, because it hadn't gone that far from India, it went right into Tibet. It retained some of the Hindu teachings and practices. So Tibetan Buddhism is very unique. It's very different from Zen Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism, and it's very different from Buddhism in Southeast Asia, like in Thailand and around that area, which is another form of Buddhism. So it's very different. In Tibetan Buddhism, you have a lot more of this, a lot more occult practices. And then they have the good and bad deities, although there's no God. Buddha never talked about God. They're like these godlike figures that are deities. They do things like when the Dalai Lama travels around, he does these things called sand mandalas. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but he's come to Washington, D.C., I think twice, and he's gone to other cities. He has a team of monks, and because the Dalai Lama, of course, is Tibetan Buddhist, and they will build these big mandalas out of sand. And this is a very intricate process that they're chanting and praying when they do it, because they believe that this becomes a palace for deities. And then after 7 days, they take it to a body of water and dissolve it into the water, because they feel that frees up all the, for want of a better word, I don't know if that they use the word blessings, but that sort of frees up the blessings, into that city. And so that's the idea behind the sand mandala, but you can tell it's a very kind of occultic kind of concept. Okay, so Tibetan Buddhism is very different. Then Buddhism went into China, and a big part of Buddhism in China merged with the religion of Taoism. And in China, it's called Chan, C-H-A-N. Now, Taoism, now, in order to talk about Zen Buddhism, I have to tell you all this because this is the background of Zen Buddhism. So I have to tell you about Taoism. So Taoism, what you probably know about Taoism is the yin and yang symbol. I'm sure most of you have seen that. Okay. That actually is an idea that supposedly existed before Taoism or apart from it, but then was adopted by Taoism and merged with Taoism. And the history of Taoism is even more complicated than the history of Hinduism, I think. It's so, I read a book on the history of Taoism once. It's so complicated, but because the teachings kind of moved along through time, taught by different teachers. And so the teachings weren't always consistent, and different ideas would be patched in there, and then it would be modified, and then it would be changed. And it's really complicated. But in Taoism, basically, you have the idea that everything comes from the Tao. Okay, it's usually spelled T-A-O, but it can also be spelled D-A-O. Everything comes from the Tao. And there's two main forces, the yin and the yang. And there's also the universal energy called Qi, C-H-I or K-I or Q-I, which is a part of a lot of martial arts training. So the use of Qi or Ki becomes part of martial arts. And this whole idea of qi and this universal energy is very much into Taoism. And actually, that part of it, the qi and all of that, is in a lot of our alternative healing in this country. So acupuncture is based on belief in qi and belief in the channels in the body called meridians that are invisible channels that carry the qi. Of course, they don't exist. And you have other alternative healing things based on, there's something called tapping that's based on Taoism too. So a lot of that is in our country through the alternative healing movement, which is spiritual, it's not medical. But I don't want to get too much into that. So in Taoism, you have this basic idea, there's no God, but there's the Tao. And what they say is that you can't say anything about the Tao, because if you do, then you don't understand the Tao. So you can't say anything about the Tao. But of course, if you say that you can't say anything about the Tao, you've just said something about the Tao. So I want you to recognize how contradictory this is. It's self-refuting, and you find this a lot in Eastern religions. But there's this idea that, you can meditate and you can understand this true nature of reality. So Taoism has its own system. They have priests, and they also have occult practices. So Chan in China, this was the kind of Taoist version of Buddhism. That form of Buddhism went into Japan, and that became Zen Buddhism. Now, other things happened along the way to Chan to make it into Zen Buddhism. There was a movement to simplify the teachings of Buddhism and to simplify the practices and make it kind of a minimalist religion. And that's pretty much what Zen is. It's very minimalist, or at least it appears very minimalist. But the idea is still Buddhist, in that the idea is there that you will keep having rebirth until you can be detached from your identity and from this reality. So you need to cultivate detachment. And that's what the meditation is for. And that's what mindfulness, which is a form of Zen Buddhist meditation. Now, when I got into Zen Buddhism after Tibetan Buddhism, I learned how to do Zen Buddhist meditation, and I went to a few Zen Buddhist groups in Atlanta, and I practiced Zen Buddhist meditation for 12 years. So I can really tell you about that because I did it for 12 years. But I want you to understand some basic ideas of Buddhism to show how contrary it is to Christianity. In Buddhism, there is no self. The self does not actually exist. This reality does not actually exist. They call it the conventional self and the conventional reality. The conventional self is the self that you think you have and that you seem to have. And you think you have this self because of your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and your memories. So all of that, including physical sensations, all of that gives you the idea that you have a separate, distinct self from other people. But that is not true. In Buddhism, that is not true. And as long as you keep thinking that, then you're going to keep having rebirth. So the whole idea to escape suffering, which means to escape this life, because Buddha said this life is suffering and there's no hope for changing that in Buddhism. You have to escape rebirth. That's the only hope. And you cultivate detachment. Well, then what happens? If you escape rebirth, then where do you go? I'm wondering if you're wondering that. Are you wondering that, Devin? Like, what happens? Okay, I'll tell you. Nirvana, which means to extinguish. It means to extinguish illusion, but it's pretty much extinguishing the self, because then basically, if you don't have a self, then how can you exist, right? So if you've cultivated detachment and you don't have any more rebirths, then what happens? They are not very clear about this. They'll say things like it's a state, you're in a state, a certain kind of state. But there's no real concrete answer to this, because it's so contradictory. If you're saying you think there's a self, but there is no self, so you have to escape this idea of self so that you can get to the point where you're actually in the state where there is no self. Well, why do we even want to get there if you're not even going to know you're there, because yourself isn't there? Okay. I mean, really, this is kind of, it's like, it's this idea that is so foreign to Western philosophical ideas about the self or the individual, etc. And this, of course, fits in somewhat with Hinduism. Now, Hinduism teaches that everybody has within them a divine self, which is called the Atman, Atman. And that figures, that's a big, big part of Hinduism. But in Buddhism, you don't even have the Atman. In fact, they call it the Atman, which means no Atman. So it's the Anatman, and there's another term for it too. So there's no Atman, there's no divine self. Nirvana is supposedly this place, I guess, where there's peace because there's really nothing there. In Buddhism, they teach everything is form or formlessness. And the true nature of reality is formlessness. Everything else is form. So your body is form, your soul, or what you think of as a soul, is form. This world is form, the animals are form, the trees are form, all that's form, and it doesn't have any substantive reality to it. So mindfulness is a practice of meditation where, and usually they tell you to, sit still, breathe slowly, usually close your eyes or have your eyes half closed. And you just kind of focus on your breathing. And if any thoughts come into your mind, you are supposed to just let them go. And there are different techniques you can use to do this, where you let the thoughts pass like clouds through your mind. Now, if you do this, now not everybody can meditate. There's a small percentage of the population that can't do it, but most people can if they try and they want to. And so if you do this enough and you do it on a regular basis, what happens is you actually start to change your view of reality changes. Because in this mindset of mindfulness, when you were watching, you're supposed to watch your thoughts go by, and that's supposed to make you realize those are not your thoughts. You are not generating them. They are being generated, but you are not generating them. Okay, they're just this phenomenon that is there, that you're seeing. And the fact that you see it means that they're not your thoughts because you're seeing them pass by. So you're supposed to realize that there's something kind of above and beyond your own self and your own mind. And that is the Buddha nature. And everybody is really a part of the Buddha nature. And the only thing that exists is Buddha nature. Sometimes they Buddha mind. Now, I'm giving it to you in the Western language. I don't know how they teach this in Japan or something. And what I'm giving you is the Zen Buddhism in this country, the United States, which had a lot of proponents and a lot of promoters, and still does, even more today, especially with mindfulness. And so the Buddhist ideas, and I'm telling you, are true. Those are actually true. I've read them in Buddhist writings. But there's all these kind of spin-offs, kind of New Age spin-offs. So there have been people that have written, like Suzuki, who was Japanese and wrote on Zen Buddhism. And then you have the Westerners who came along and wrote on it. Alan Watts is a very famous one. He was very big back in the day, I don't know, like in the 70s and the 80s. Then you have these other people that were following Eastern teachings who were writing on Zen Buddhism. And the way they present it makes it sound very appealing. It has this appeal because it seems to be getting rid of anything extraneous. It seems to like cut right to the heart of things. And it has certain sayings that sound kind of paradoxical. So they sound, to a lot of people, they sound very profound and very wise. Like there's all these famous little Zen stories that I read, like where you have the Zen master and the Zen student, and then they'll have this little dialogue. And so there's all kinds of stories like that. One of them is, I think the Zen master is talking to the Zen student, and he says, look in the lake, and it happens to be nighttime and the moon is out, and there's a reflection of the moon in the lake. And he says, what do you see? And the student says, well, I see the moon. And the Zen master says, okay, but is that the moon? And the boy says, no, that's just the reflection of the moon. And then the Zen master will say something to him that's supposed to help him have this profound realization about the moon. That's just the reflection that's not real, but it looks real. So there's kind of that idea there. I can't remember exactly how the story goes, but there's hundreds of these stories, and I read a lot of them. Then you have like somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh, who has written bestsellers. He's a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk. He's written bestsellers, and I've done some Facebook posts on him. Then you have someone like Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is a Westerner. I think maybe he's Jewish, I'm not sure, but he's a Westerner, and he studied under a Zen Buddhist master. And then he was at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, and he started a mindfulness program there for chronically ill patients. And this was like back in maybe the late 70s. And then the word got out on it, and it got more popular. And by the early 90s or mid 90s, this had spread to over 200 hospitals. And now, of course, mindfulness is everywhere. But Jon Kabat-Zinn is one of the people that really kicked this off. I'm just checking the time here. Okay. He's one of the people who is enormously influential in the mindfulness movement in this country. So I knew about him and these other people, Alan Watts and Suzuki. Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't think had even come to this country when I was in the New Age. I think he came later, but I learned about him as part of my ministry, and I read a book by him. And I read other books by other people who are pushing mindfulness or Zen Buddhism. Now, what they try to say, one reason mindfulness spreads is because they try to present it as a secular practice. They don't promote it as a Zen Buddhist meditation. Sometimes they don't even want to let you know that it's coming from Zen Buddhism. So particularly in the schools, they try to make it very secular. And this is just a technique that, is going to help the students feel calm and centered. And so when they have some kind of crises in a school, like they might have a series of suicides, maybe 3 students kill themselves over the course of 6 months or something, the school will go into crisis mode and think, we've got to do something. What do? We need to address mental health issues. And so what has happened is these mindfulness organizations that want to see mindfulness spread will contact the school and say, hey, we'll send in a team of people to teach mindfulness to some students if you're willing to try it out, and we won't even charge you for it. And so they'll send these people in, and they'll do it maybe in a few classes, or maybe they'll do it for one grade. And then, of course, it'll catch on. And so it'll spread, and then it'll become an established thing in the school. And then they'll train the teachers in it. Now, they have done mindfulness for children as young as kindergarten age. Okay, I have an article on my website. In fact, I think it's my first article on mindfulness that I wrote, called Mindfulness Goes to Kindergarten. And the reason I wrote this is that a parent at my church came up to me one day and showed me this magazine, and it was a parent's magazine and big cover story on mindfulness and introducing mindfulness. Her 5-year-old daughter had gotten this in her kindergarten class. The teacher had sent it home to all the parents and had put it in her backpack in her little bundle of stuff that she was supposed to show her parents. And so this woman who knew me and knew my ministry brought it to me and said, I thought you'd be interested in this. And I said, oh yeah, definitely. And so I read the article, and I ended up writing an article, Mindfulness Goes to Kindergarten, on my website. So it's one of my, I think, 4 articles on mindfulness on my website, but I've also done a lot of programs on mindfulness. And starting in 2011, when I saw mindfulness really beginning to spread, I started posting posts. I started posting on mindfulness on Facebook. And I did a whole lot of posts. I don't even know how many I did from 2011 to like 2018, 2019. I did posts, a lot of posts, because if you just go there and do a search, you'll see like a lot will come up. I mean, even on Google, if you just do Marcia Montenegro mindfulness Facebook, you'll get a lot of stuff. And I just started, I was tracking it, and I noticed it getting into the schools. So I started posting on mindfulness in the schools. One of my later posts, which actually I just referred some people to here recently because they're coming across it now in their schools, is a post that's called Mindfulness Wants a School Culture of Mindfulness. And that's a quote from an organization. I think it's called Minds Inc., INC, that pushes mindfulness in the schools. I got on their email list for a while. And one day I got this email with this little article, and it said, we want a school culture of mindfulness. And basically the article said, we want it to be so entrenched in the school that it's just part of everything in the school. It's part of the curriculum. All the teachers know it. Students do it. It's going to become part of the school culture. And so I did a very, very long post on that. And meanwhile, at the same time, I'm reading about this and warning about it on Facebook. I'm coming across material that talks about how mindfulness meditation also has negative consequences. Now, this doesn't surprise me at all, because since mindfulness is basically a deconstruction of the self, and I actually have a Facebook post that's called Mindfulness, a Deconstruction of the Self. Since that is the idea of it, I'm not too surprised that some people who do it have psychotic breaks, and they have these episodes of dissociation where they don't know who they are anymore. They're just like lost. I don't know who I am. And they have these breakdowns. So there was a psychologist who was noticing these negative effects, and she actually formed an organization called the Dark Night Project. This is a number of years ago. I'm not sure how long ago, maybe 8 years ago, possibly. The Dark Night Project, and she started gathering together all the data to show that there were negative results, because a lot of the studies that were being used to promote mindfulness and to promote mindfulness in the schools were based on flawed methodology. And this came out later too. There was a book called The Buddha Pill, which actually I read, and it's these 2 psychologists who wrote about the studies on mindfulness and how flawed they were. Now, these psychologists are secular people, and they actually are for meditation. They're not against it. But what they don't like is the fact that the methodology on the studies of mindfulness weren't being done properly. So they wrote a whole book on it. It's very interesting, an interesting book. I can't remember the author's name, but the book's called The Buddha Pill. So what's happened in our culture is that everybody's jumped on this mindfulness bandwagon. It's in psychology, it's in the schools. And now we have Christian mindfulness. I did some Facebook posts on that. And everybody thinks it's a good thing. And a lot of times the reason they think it's a good thing is because they don't really understand the purpose of it, and they don't understand the concept behind it. And they think all it is, well, it's just be in the present moment. Oh, mindfulness is just focusing on what I'm doing now. That's what mindfulness is. No, it's so much more than that. Because the idea is, yes, to focus on the present moment. But the reason you're supposed to focus on the present moment is that you're supposed to realize the past and the future don't exist. So that's going to help you detach from the past and the future. So that's the reason you're supposed to focus on the present moment. It has nothing to do with cultivating serenity or being calm or, finding peace. That's not the purpose of mindfulness. The purpose of mindfulness is to deconstruct your view of reality and your sense of self as an individual. That's the purpose of it. So it's a very destructive, to me, I see the hand of the enemy here. I see it as an attack on people because we're made in the image of God. And basically Buddhism takes that away, because we actually, of course, because there is no God to begin with. But the idea of being made in the image of God has no meaning or value because you really don't exist as an individual. And it's so different from Christianity, where we're told, and God's revelation tells us, that we are created in the image of God. We're distinct individuals. We're distinct, and we will always be distinct. We're not going to merge with some, spirit in the sky. We're not going to merge with some godlike cosmic figure. We're not going to merge with each other. We're going to remain individuals forever. Whether it's with God or without God, we're going to be who we are, and we're going to be a distinct individual. And of course, only in Christianity do you have the idea of having a body after death. You really don't have that in any other religion that I know of. Now, true, it's not the mortal body, it's an immortal body, but it is our body. It's like the body of Jesus when he resurrected. So it was still Jesus, he didn't look like somebody else. He didn't become another person. So I want you to understand that the real meaning and purpose of this thing that can look so innocuous or so helpful is completely evil. It's completely evil. And I always say, I don't recommend doing any form of Eastern meditation. I, of course, don't recommend mindfulness. And I also want to say, I won't deny that if you do mindfulness or you do some Eastern meditation, that you might feel good. You might feel peace. You might feel a sense of peace. You might even feel that God's with you. You might have a good feeling. I won't deny that you might have a good feeling. I did when I did the meditations. Not always, but sometimes I did. So I'm not going to deny that there might be a good feeling there, but that's not the criteria we should use to evaluate something. The feeling is like a delusion. It's temporary, and it's not a real lasting peace. It's not real serenity. So anyway, I think I can take questions. I know it's not quite 8, but I'm sure I left something out, and if I think of it, I'll add it in there. But I feel like I kind of I hopefully gave the idea of where Zen Buddhism came from, and its background, some context to it, what the purpose of it is. So that was, and of course there's a lot more to it, but I don't consider myself an expert on it. So I couldn't do any kind of scholarly lecture on it, but I just was involved with it for so long and did so much reading. And then in my ministry, I've done more reading. So, I've had to deal with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that was very informative. There's a lot of, it just ties into so many different things with, like you say, Taoism and then
Yeah.
mindfulness and different kinds of Buddhism. So it's a
Yeah.
lot to have to know.
Oh, yeah. I did one more quick thing. I did
Yeah.
forgot to say Buddhism. I mentioned the Buddhism that went into Tibet and into China. Buddhism split into two kind of factions. The Mahayana Buddhism, which is called the Greater Vehicle, and then the other Buddhism, which I forgot the word for it, of course, naturally, because I'm trying to think of it, which is like the smaller vehicle or whatever. That form of Buddhism went to Thailand and Burma and Southeast Asia. Mahayana Buddhism is in China, Japan, Korea, and Northeastern Asia. And the difference is this: the Buddhism of the lesser vehicle in Southeast Asia stuck to the teachings of Buddha. And they're kind of, if you want to say stricter, they're kind of stricter. They didn't incorporate any of the later Buddha teachings, what are called the sutras that came later. They didn't incorporate those. And they also are very oriented towards monkhood. Like a lot of men become monks in Southeast Asia, even if it's just for a while, not their whole life, because it's part of the culture and they feel that they'll get a benefit from it. And if you're a woman, you can't do it, but you can benefit from it, like if your son becomes a monk. So you get some kind of spiritual, you know, good luck charms from your son being a Buddhist monk. So it confers something on you. So they're much more oriented towards, so you'll find more monasteries and more people being monks. In Mahayana Buddhism, they took the later teachings, and Zen Buddhism is a form of Mahayana Buddhism. They have later teachings, and they aren't as oriented towards you having to be in a monastery in order to get your good spiritual blessings. So you don't have to be in the monastery, but of course, they do have monasteries, but it's not like Southeast Asia. So there's a difference. The Mahayana Buddhism also believes that anybody can become enlightened and become a Buddha. In the other Buddhism, they don't believe that.
Okay.
So there are these distinct differences between those two schools of Buddhism.
Okay. Very good. Does anybody have any particular questions that we could ask? Yeah, you come on down. Price is right.
Right.
All right. So, how are you? I hope this question is quick and simple.
Okay.
A lot of the stuff you said, I did identify with, and I learned a lot about Buddhism, about five noble truths and nirvana, and the idea of enlightenment, and even Taoism and stuff. Because I've taken a couple classes on campus, and my minor
Oh,
is religion. And so, but my
okay.
question was to you. You talked about your search in religions, and how you even studied Buddhism and participated in it for 12 years. How did you transition from Buddhism back to Christianity, and what was that deciding factor that made you understand that this is where I want to be, and our
Okay.
God is the God that you wanted to serve? And what would you
Okay.
say to
Yeah,
other
that's
people?
okay. Thanks for asking that. Actually, that would be my testimony, which I kind of gave a little, I guess I gave a little summary of it in the first talk. I don't remember how much I shared on it. It's a long, kind of a long story though. Um, and I would say, first of all, I wasn't trying to get away from what I believed, that I really believed what I believed, and I really thought it was true, and I really thought I was on a spiritual path. Um, but God just intervened in my life. And that's kind of a story in itself. That I don't think did I tell that the first time? I think I did. Maybe the first talk. I
Yeah.
think I gave
Yeah, you did kind of a
I
little.
don't know how
bio.
detailed I was, but the young man who just asked me that question, if he would watch the video of my first talk, which was on the occult, I think I told it there. And also for him and anybody else, my story is on my website at christiananswersforthenewage.org. But basically, God intervened in my life. It was a series of things that happened over several months where God first gave me a compulsion to go to a church, which I didn't want to do and which I resisted for several months. And then I went into a church. I had an experience of feeling God's love. I knew it was from God, but I didn't even believe in a personal God. Then I had a series of impressions about astrology that I should give it up. And I actually gave astrology up before I became a Christian. And then I started reading the Bible. And while I was reading the Bible, I was reading a portion of Matthew 8. And while I was reading an account there and I kept rereading it, God just opened my eyes. So it wasn't any kind of like realization that I had. It was just intervention of the Lord, basically. I mean, really, I didn't do any of that. I had no desire to do any of that. I didn't have a desire to go to a church or give astrology up or to read the Bible. I still don't know why I read the Bible. I think I just thought, well, if I'm not going to do astrology anymore and I'm going to a church, I guess I'll read the Bible. And by the way, the church was a very, 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 very open-minded church. It was not the kind of church where anybody would tell me that astrology was a bad thing. In fact, some people there wanted my business card. So I wasn't getting any kind of message at the church, any kind of gospel or, I needed to turn to Christ or anything. I wasn't getting any of that. So this is all really the hand of God that just kind of drew me to Christ. So that's kind of a summary of it.
Anybody else have any other further questions? Come on up.
Good evening.
Hi.
Yep. I have a question. So, so going back to, the whole evolution of Buddhism or, splits in it. So as you said, Tibetan Buddhism, they have a Dalai Lama. And from what I understand, which is, I'm not going to lie, limited, that's like their spiritual leader for Tibetan Buddhism, am I right?
It's a spiritual leader for one Tibetan Buddhist school. There's 4 major schools.
Okay. And
Yeah.
here's the question I want to get into.
Okay.
I was wondering, so as Buddhism moved towards the East, all of the schools of Buddhism, including China, Japan, Southeast Asia, do they have their own form of like religious leaders, or do they like all ascribe to Buddha as being like, the ultimate teacher?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's a variety depending on where you are. Like it'll be one way in one country according to the culture, because Buddhism a lot of times will kind of absorb some of the cultural religions. Like, of course, in Japan, you have Shinto, which was a religion that I think already existed there before Buddhism came. And Shinto is very shamanistic and animistic, like the religion of Bon in Tibet. Now, I'm not saying Buddhism and Shinto are combined, but apparently I have been told by missionaries to Japan that even the people who call themselves Buddhists will go to Shinto priests. So they kind of, in a way, still practice Shintoism because it's so much a part of the culture. I don't think there's no like one leader. Like in Tibetan Buddhism, it's more organized, and they have those 4 schools, and each of those schools is headed by a lama or a leader. And the Dalai Lama is the head of one school. Plus, he was. This happened years ago before he was even born. They decided the head of his school would be kind of a state head over the other schools. So he sort of took prominence over the others, but they still each have their own school with their own traditions and their own teachings. When you get outside of that, If you go to Southeast Asia, I think it's more organized too, because it centers around the monasteries, and they probably have, different teachers. It's somewhat like in Hinduism, where you can go to different gurus, and you can get, this guru will teach it this way, but then this guru will teach it another way. And so you don't get taught the exact same thing. Some of the core ideas are the same, but there's a lot of variety, because there's no real centralized belief system and no real centralized doctrine. In Buddhism, it's the main thing, or the four, the four truths of Buddha, the four truths of Buddhism, and the Eightfold Noble Path. So the Eightfold Noble Path has right thinking, right living, etc. And those are kind of like ethical guides, and those are pretty common to all of Buddhism. But after that point, you can have different Buddhist teachers. Like in Zen Buddhism, you could go to one Zen Buddhist master and learn from him, but there could be another Zen Buddhist master other people would be learning from. So it's really, there's not really a centralized teacher or a centralized format that everybody looks to. They all look to the Buddhist teachings as they have them, and then they go by, if they're learning on their own from a teacher, they'll go by what that teacher teaches. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good question. I'm glad you asked that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's go you, and then, yep. So we got a couple more coming here for you.
Okay, great.
Hey,
Hi.
this might be a topic for a different time, but you had mentioned how Buddhism was kind of changed and shifted, and like nobody knows what exactly the original, or kind of it's not the same everywhere. And how would you say is the Bible nowadays trustworthy? I know it's switching over to a different topic, but it's like,
Is what trustworthy?
the Bible, like, because it's been translated a bunch of times, and there's different versions that say different things, kind of.
Yes, I think it's very different, because the good question, thank you. Because the Bible, we actually do have historical documents that have been found. We have them for the Old Testament that were found in the, like with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the New Testament documents that were found, the manuscripts that were found, and parts of manuscripts. There's so many of them that, they verify. The differences are so minor among them that they don't amount to any kind of change in any significant teaching in the Bible. But we do have actually the New Testament. The documentary evidence for the New Testament is the best evidence over any other ancient document. No other ancient document has the evidence that the New Testament has. And then, of course, Jesus verified the Old Testament and quoted from it all the time. And lots of other New Testament writers quote from the Old Testament. So we actually have a historical thing with the Bible and writings that were preserved that we can go back to. And also the early church fathers would refer to parts of the Bible as scripture. And so we have all of that. We have a real body of knowledge that gives evidence to the Bible. Whereas with Buddhism, in fact, I'm glad she asked that question, because I just realized something I forgot to tell you guys. The teachings of Buddha were not written down until about 500 years after his death. And that was around 29 AD. So that is when the first known Buddhist writings were written down as 500 years. Whereas with Jesus, for example, in the New Testament, the books started being written less than 30 years after his crucifixion and resurrection. So maybe even less than that. So you know, and tremendous difference there, a really big difference. But yeah, I'm glad she asked that question.
Hello.
Hello.
My question, can you hear me?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay. My question was, do you think that your education and your occupation impacted your religious lifestyle that you started to have with Buddhism?
Well, the education, my introduction to Hinduism came through a project I did on Gandhi in college. That definitely got me interested in Gandhi and Hinduism. So that did have an impact on me. Not anything I did as a job had any connection to my spiritual beliefs. I was, I had various jobs. Most of them were like office jobs. And it wasn't a profession. It was basically office work, even though I had a 4-year college degree. At that time, which is really quite a while ago, women pretty much were asked how fast they could type. And that was really all they were interested in, even if you had a 4-year college degree. So unless you had gone on and gotten some kind of graduate degree or something, you were very limited as the kind of jobs you could do. You could teach, you could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, or you could type. It was kind of the major areas for women. And so nothing I did in the workplace had any effect on my religious beliefs. I think the Buddhism came along, was probably an outgrowth of my initial interest in Hinduism and Eastern religions in general.
Any other questions? Well, you guys have some great questions, and
Yes, those were good.
yeah, really great topic tonight, Marcia. Really appreciate you coming on.
Well,
and
thank you.
Yeah, we'll upload the video and it'll be there on YouTube tomorrow. But yeah, thanks for all the wisdom and just taking your time and sharing with us.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it very much. I appreciate your group having me 4 times in a row. And, in the future down the road, if you're ready to have me back, please do.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, this actually took us into our last meeting of the semester.
oh,
I didn't
okay.
even realize, because I forgot next week is Thanksgiving. I was
Right.
No, that
So, great.
worked
So,
good though. Yeah, it turned out to be a great series. So
please share my email with them if they want to email me, or if they're on Facebook, they can contact me there.
yeah, give me your
And
website and that again.
huh?
Give them your website and your email.
Yes, ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org. And on Facebook, I have a ministry page called ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org. And my email is theexastrologer@gmail.com.
And on this topic, I really don't know anybody that is a better resource. So, which is why I come to her with these type of questions and issues. That's why I wanted her to share with you guys, because she really is top level. So, thanks for coming.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Devin. Thanks, guys. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.